the day my teacher made me stand in front of the class, holding my torn notebook, will haunt me forever. "Maybe if your parents worked harder, you wouldn't look like a beggar," she said, and the class laughed. I was 12, my shoes held together with tape, my pride crumbling on the cold classroom floor. That day, something inside me broke. But another part woke up. My name is Clara Hayes, and I was the poor girl everyone pitied or mocked. I didn't know it then, but humiliation would become the spark that built my empire. 10 years later, when I walked into that same school with a tailored suit, a black Mercedes parked outside, and a pen ready to sign the ownership papers. The same teacher who called me a beggar was standing at the gate, holding her breath. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everything about everyone, except what it felt like to be hungry. My mother worked double shifts at a diner, her hands always smelling like dish soap and coffee. My father had left when I was 8, leaving behind nothing but debts and the sound of slammed doors. We lived in a 2-room apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin, the nights were long, and the dreams were loud. Still, my mother never stopped saying, "Clara, education will change everything." I believed her, until I met Mrs. Wallace, my 7th-grade teacher. She was elegant, with perfect hair and pearls that clicked when she turned her head. But behind that polished smile was venom. She didn't just teach, she measured children by their parents' bank accounts. I was invisible until the day I wasn't, the day I made the mistake of coming to school without a proper notebook. It wasn't that I forgot. It was that we couldn't afford it that week. When she saw me writing on scrap paper, she asked me to stand. Her voice echoed across the class. "Children, this is what happens when people don't try hard enough in life." The laughter stung, but what hurt more was the look in her eyes. Not pity, but disgust. That was the day I stopped believing teachers always wanted the best for you. That day, I promised myself, one day, she'll have to look up to me. That night, I went home and found my mother asleep at the kitchen table, her head on a pile of unpaid bills. I touched her hand, calloused, cold, and something hardened inside me. I wanted to make her proud, but more than that, I wanted revenge. Not the kind that breaks people, the kind that builds you so high they can't reach you anymore. From that night on, I studied like I was training for war. I borrowed books from the library, learned math on YouTube, and practiced English essays by copying articles word for word until my handwriting bled through the pages. When others laughed at my worn-out shoes, I smiled. When Mrs. Wallace ignored my raised hand, I whispered the right answers to myself. By the time I finished high school, I had the highest grades in the district. But even then, when I stood on stage to collect my scholarship, Mrs. Wallace refused to clap. "She's just lucky," I overheard her say. "Smart kids from poor homes never last long." That sentence became my fuel. College was a blur of part-time jobs, sleepless nights, and instant noodles. I worked at a bookstore, a coffee shop, even cleaned offices just to afford textbooks. But I never forgot her voice, or the laughter of that classroom. Every late night was a reply to her insult. Every A grade was a brick in the foundation I was building. By 22, I had graduated top of my business class. By 25, I had launched a small tutoring company from a shared apartment. I didn't know it then, but that tiny business, born from humiliation, was about to explode into something no one saw coming. At first, I just wanted to help kids like me, the ones who couldn't afford private tutors or fancy prep schools. I started with free weekend classes in local libraries. Soon, word spread. Kids were improving their grades. Parents who once couldn't afford help started saving just to enroll. Within 2 years, I had 10 instructors working for me. I called the company Second Chance Learning. It grew fast, too fast. Investors started calling, schools wanted partnerships, and within 5 years, my tutoring company became a nationwide education franchise. Every success came with flashbacks of that classroom. Mrs. Wallace's smirk, the laughter, the ache in my chest. One day, as I sat in my downtown office signing papers for a new regional expansion, I got a call from an old classmate named Megan. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief, "you'll never believe this. They're selling our old school." My pen froze mid-signature. The same school where I was humiliated, the one that told me I'd never make it, was up for sale. It was like the universe had just handed me a stage for my full circle moment. "Who's handling the sale?" I asked. "Mrs. Wallace," Megan replied. "She's the new principal now." I smiled slowly, the kind of smile that carries both pain and power. I didn't tell anyone, but that night, I pulled out the same torn notebook I'd once been mocked for, the one I had kept all these years as a reminder. I ran my fingers over the faded cover and whispered, "It's time." The next week, I drove to my hometown, this time in a black Mercedes. The streets hadn't changed much. The same bakery, the same cracked sidewalks, the same whispers behind curtains. But I wasn't the same girl anymore. When I stepped through the school gates, a wave of memories hit me. Chalk dust, children's laughter, and humiliation burned into every corner. Mrs. Wallace was in the courtyard, clipboard in hand. When she saw me, confusion crossed her face. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone still sharp, still superior. I smiled. "I'm here to buy the school." Her jaw dropped. "You're joking." "Not at all," I said, showing her the letter from the board confirming the sale negotiation. "I'm the highest bidder." For the first time, she had no words. We sat in the same classroom where she once mocked me. The sunlight hit the dusty desks, and I noticed how old the place had become. Like her. "Why this school?" she asked finally. "Surely you could buy something bigger." I looked around, then met her eyes. "Because this is where I learned my first real lesson." She shifted uncomfortably. "And what lesson was that?" I leaned forward. "That sometimes, the people who teach you the hardest way end up being your greatest motivators." Her lips pressed thin. I could see the shame flickering behind her eyes, but I didn't want her apology. I wanted her realization. A week later, the deal closed. I officially became the owner of Riverside Elementary, the same school that once told me I was destined to fail. At the ceremony, the staff gathered in the hall. Mrs. Wallace was there too, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a folder. I took the stage. "I once stood in this school as a student who was told she'd never amount to anything," I began. "Today, I stand here as the new owner, not to gloat, but to change what this place stands for." The crowd was silent. This school will never again shame a child for being poor. Every student, no matter their background, will get free access to learning tools and mentorship. There was applause, some tears, and one stunned face in the corner, Mrs. Wallace's. After the ceremony, she approached me. Her voice was small, almost fragile. "Clara, I was wrong about you." I smiled softly. "No, Mrs. Wallace. You were right about one thing. I didn't last long as a poor kid. I outgrew it." She looked down, then whispered, "I hope you can forgive me." I nodded. I already did, the moment I signed those papers. She left that day quietly, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger, only peace. Under my ownership, Riverside Elementary became a model of compassion. We built new classrooms, funded scholarships, and trained teachers to lead with empathy, not ego. Children who once felt small now saw themselves as limitless. The press covered the story. "Local girl buys the school that once humiliated her." But to me, it wasn't about headlines. It was about healing the little girl who once stood crying in that classroom. Sometimes at night, I'd walk through the empty halls and imagine my 12-year-old self sitting in that back row, dreaming, trembling, but never giving up. I'd whisper to her, "You did it." One afternoon, a student came up to me. "Miss Hayes," she said shyly, "my mom says we don't have money for supplies, but can I still come to school?" I knelt down and smiled. You can come every day. Here, no one's ever turned away. Her eyes lit up, the same way mine once did when I still believed in second chances. And in that moment, I realized, revenge fades, but kindness rebuilds everything. Sometimes the people who humiliate you are the ones who build your backbone without realizing it. Mrs. Wallace didn't just insult me, she introduced me to my purpose. Success isn't about showing others what they missed, it's about showing yourself what you were always capable of. When I bought that school, it wasn't to make her feel small. It was to make sure no child ever felt the way I once did. Life has a funny way of circling back. The ones who laugh at your beginnings often end up standing in awe of your endings. If you've ever been underestimated, remember this. Pain can either crush you or carve you into something unstoppable. Mine carved me into a woman who bought the very place that broke her and turned it into a home for dreamers. Because sometimes, the sweetest victory isn't revenge. It's transformation.